authenticity is something that it's extraordinarily important. And it's hard to be authentic if you're an introvert trying to be a pretend extrovert.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. I'm your host, Michael Palmer. Today, our guest serves as a guide to introverted entrepreneurs who want to amplify their strengths and build sustainable, energetically aligned businesses. She is a professional coach, author, podcaster, and speaker, and she is based in the Pacific Northwest and serves introverts worldwide. She is also the author of The Introvert Entrepreneur, Amplify Your Strengths and Create Success on Your Own Terms. Welcome to the podcast, Beth.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. And now I have to ask, because I actually said, welcome to the podcast, Beth, but I want you to pronounce your last name so I don't.
It's so funny. As you were reading that, I thought, oops, I don't think I clarified my last name pronunciation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Buelow.
Buelow. So, and the
Buelow.
spelling of that, just so we have the spelling for everyone, it's Beth Buelow. It's Buelow.
That is right.
And if you type that into Google, you're going to find Beth's website and all the information on her. And of course, we'll have all the information about Beth on our show notes. But I just wanted to make sure we got that. So it's Buelow and we're good. So let's move on.
Excellent. Yeah.
So, Beth, I wanted you on the podcast because I saw your website and I thought, first off, it's a great website, got lots of great content there and information, and it really looks great. And as well, I think when I'm working with bookkeepers, a lot of the times we're talking about sales and marketing their business. And they think that salespeople and marketers and people need to be gregarious people out there, work in the room and all that. And I tell them that's not the way you need to be. And I think you're probably someone that can bring a lot of information and inspiration and confidence to bookkeepers to actually just be whoever they are. Because let's face it, if you're working with numbers and working on books and finances and stuff like that, you probably have a little bit of an introverted side. And so I would assert that a lot of bookkeepers are introverted, not all of them, but probably would have a lot of introverted types like that. So this is going to be great for our show today.
Great.
Give us a little background on you and how you got working with introverted entrepreneurs.
Well, I'm an introvert myself, which helps in the job qualifications. And I've had a long time interest in personality types and particularly this introvert-extrovert dichotomy. And it started coming back in 2008. Like a lot of small business owners, I knew that I needed to really be clear about my target market, right? We can't just scatter our message out to the wind, especially for introverts, because we need to be able to focus our energy on a market that and on a people that we feel that we can truly connect with and serve and that we have a solution for. And it wasn't apparent immediately as I started my coaching. I thought I was going to be doing like nonprofit leadership work and going down a different path. And over time, as I just kind of paid attention to who was showing up and who my message seemed to be resonating with, it was introverts. And it took me about 6 months after I even realized that's who was showing up, that was who I was meant to serve. So it was a little bit of an unfolding discovery process, but I realized that so much of the information that's out there, and as you pointed out, Michael, that especially around sales, there's so much messaging about how you should, quote unquote, should be in terms of being gregarious and outgoing and all of the networking that you have to do and putting yourself out there. It's all coming, at least it used to all be coming from an extroverted point of view. And so there was this real need, both from what I saw in terms of the clients who were coming to me, as well as in the marketplace, for another message that said, hey, you can be successful. You can be wildly successful as an introvert in sales and networking and marketing and being an entrepreneur and a small business owner. And you can do it without compromising who you are. In fact, if you compromise who you are, then that's almost a formula for not succeeding. Because as you and I were chatting before we went live, authenticity is something that it's extraordinarily important. And it's hard to be authentic if you're an introvert trying to be a pretend extrovert. So that's kind of how I found the message and the voice and the folks that I work with. It happened kind of organically, but I think it unfolded out of just really listening to what was going on in the marketplace and who was showing up at my door.
And I like that you identify yourself as that, which I think will really help you serving that marketplace. Yeah. So our listeners are definitely on the edge of their seat right now, listening. Let's get into how you see the first challenges appear for the people that you work with, and then we'll start to look at perhaps how to work with your strengths as a person, even though you are an introverted person.
Yeah. It seems when people show up first, and especially when they first are starting their business, the biggest challenge for introverts often, and I won't say that extroverts don't experience this as well. I think there are lots of things that both introverts and extroverts experience in business that might be shared, but the way they respond to them is different. And perhaps the solutions that they seek out and find are successful are going to be different. So I just share that to keep that in mind for somebody listening who says, well, I'm an extrovert and I feel that too. That happens to me too. The difference sometimes comes in, like I said, how we respond to it, how we relate to whatever that challenge is. And one of the challenges a lot of introverted clients come to me with in the beginning is precisely what I was talking about in finding my own niche, which was finding a way to focus. They're often drawn to entrepreneurship or being a small business owner because of maybe a traditional work environment or a corporate work environment that didn't honor who they were, that sort of tied their hands behind their back a little bit in terms of personality possibilities. And so they come to this opportunity with this big, open, wide, blank slate. And there are so many options and they have so many interests, and they want to, make sure that they are focusing their energy in the best way possible. Because they're introverts, they recognize that their energy is their most precious resource. It's their greatest asset. And they know that if they do, again, all the quote unquote shoulds, that they're going to be spreading themselves too thin. And so it's imperative that they find that way to focus their energy that's going to create the most success. So that's one of the first things that often comes up is, how do I define who I serve? What my message is? How am I showing up in such a way that's not going to exhaust me? And then it, sort of branches out from there, from that core of just figuring out, how am I showing up and who am I showing up to? Then it's, what kinds of networking am I going to do that I can make sure that I'm reaching out to the people that I need while still being authentic? How can I market myself and show up on social media? How do I choose what platforms I'm going to be on? All of those things sometimes we can jump to those first because they're those external, bright, shiny object kinds of things that are sort of the obvious parts of being an entrepreneur. But really at the core of it and where we really need to start is getting that clarity on who you are, what your solution is, and who your solution is for. And then it grows from there.
Okay, so let's look at a few, because essentially in my mind, and I'm more from the standpoint coming at things from a client acquisition. So bookkeepers, they're great doing their work, and we could talk about how they can become more efficient at their work. But let's steer this towards client acquisition, because as an introvert, we're going to make the assumption that, one of the things they like to do is work by themselves and work alone. Now, I know there's a lot of we could even probably get into a conversation of really what is an introvert.
Right.
And actually, maybe we should talk a little bit about that, because some people might call themselves introverts when they're a little bit of both. So maybe speak to that first, and then we'll get to this client acquisition and how we can use our strengths as a person to actually, like you started to talk about, as in different areas, and where you've maybe seen some of the people you've worked with have some success. But let's talk about that introvert versus extrovert.
Yeah, definitely. And really, that is the core to start with, is understanding what it means to be an introvert. And lots of people think it's about your social skills or how you're showing up, or I even like to say, I don't like to think of it as a personality trait, because that's talking about it as a very external kind of thing. It's like the manifestation of what's really internal, and has to do with your energy. So I think of it as an introvert will gain energy through solitude and lower stimulation environments, quiet, working alone, being able to work with ideas and whatnot. And they'll drain energy during social interaction. Think networking, or, going out and prospecting, or going to large events. Those situations we absolutely can be very good at those situations. It's just that instead of it feeding us energetically, it takes energy from us. And that's why we have to recharge our batteries by ourselves in quiet, in that solitude. And an extrovert, and I don't like to think of them as opposites, but, for simplicity's sake of explaining this, let's think of it as the opposite, which is an extrovert will gain energy in those social environments and in those higher stimulation activities. And they'll drain energy if they're left kind of to their own devices for too long, without any external stimulation coming their way.
Very interesting. I mean, I've for a long time thought I was an extrovert, because I can be gregarious, I can be outgoing and meet people and all those sorts of things at times, but I actually prefer to be at the side of the room, watching and observing. And I love my alone time. I love being alone, working on things. So I'm actually have that introverted side where I gain energy by being able to work through problems and do these sorts of things. And so I think a lot of listeners will get something from this, is that it's this whole conversation of getting energy. So you want to store up the energy doing the things that you feel best doing, so that you can go spend some of that energy doing what you have to do. That's maybe you can still do it, but it might be energy draining. Exactly.
And you could do it. You could be great at it. People would be like thinking, oh, she's really outgoing. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm outgoing because for every 1 hour that I spend, chatting up with people, I am spending 3 hours, in the background or on the sidelines or by myself. And that's what enables me to get out there and do that. And we all are on this spectrum. And so even as an introvert, I have some extrovert energy in me. And that's what I encourage my clients, and I work on myself to being able to draw out in a really healthy and productive way in order to accomplish our goals.
Beautiful. And that's a great segue now to go into some of these things that maybe not are some of those energy high cost areas, like networking, going and calling people, setting up meetings to go and meet with them. Because bookkeepers, to really build a powerful, successful business, they do need to be known. They need to be known, and they have to have relationships outside of their current network to really expand. And so to do that is one powerful way is networking. Another powerful way is to work with people who can refer business to you, like accountants or people that work with entrepreneurs like yourself. So how do they build up that? Now we know they could be great at it. So what's your advice for them that need to go and do this type of work?
First is to think of networking not as a necessary evil. We can build up stories about networking and say, oh, I have to go do this. And it's an activity that's separate and apart from the rest of my work. And so to examine those stories and say, what am I making up about networking? that it's about sales and leaving with a handful of business cards and whatnot. I think a lot of the literature around that has shifted, fortunately, to where it's more about making true connections with people. Going to an event and recognizing, first off, everybody's there for the same purpose. I think sometimes we can forget that. We think, I don't want to break into that conversation, or I don't want to introduce myself or whatever. I don't want to bother anybody. And that's some of those stories, or they don't want to hear about my business, or, something like that. I don't want to come across as selling. Those are all some of those tapes that are going in our head. And so the first step is to, kind of let go of some of those stories and to say, yeah, it's networking, but what it really is just, it's just meeting people. It's just making connections and having conversations. It's really simple. And for me as an introvert, a successful networking event is if I go in and I talk to maybe 2 or 3 people and have meaningful conversations, make some sort of connection with at least one of those people. I feel like I'm going to follow up in some way. And that follow-up doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be about business right away. It might be, I shared with them, have you read this book? I really, I think you would really enjoy it based on what you've shared with me. Can I send you a link to it? Or, I just read this article that I think you would find really interesting. Or, I know somebody that you should meet. So coming away from that networking event, not with the fistful of business cards and not feeling like, I've got to prospect, it's more about, I just want to make some meaningful human connections with a couple of people and see where those go. And when you treat networking as an integrated activity as opposed to separate and apart from, then you realize that you're kind of making those connections all the time, every day on different levels. And it might just be, it might be your spouse's or your partner's colleague that you strike up a conversation with in the elevator. It might be you're walking down the street and you happen to cross paths with someone and you just stop and you chat for a minute. To me, networking is just keeping yourself and what you do top of mind. And you can do that through those sorts of informal conversations, as well as going to actual formal designated networking events. And the more you practice it on that informal level, on that everyday, chatting on the street or in the elevator, the more comfortable you're going to get doing it when you go to the convention center that's having a big, networking event or whatever, or the Chamber of Commerce kind of thing. So, to see it just as it's conversation. It's keeping yourself and what you do top of mind, and it's also reaching out and seeing how you can help other people, and whether that's helping other people in a way that is exchanging value of money, or if it's just exchanging value of information or resources or people. If you treat it as all part of the same package and activity and just integrated with what you do, then it becomes a lot easier and a lot less stressful.
I agree with you completely. I know early on when I was probably in my early 20s, I was in business and business school, and everything was about, network and build your network. And back then it was like, you got to play golf, It was these funny things that had these. I grew up in a small town, and so it was like, successful business people play golf. So I was like, I guess I got to play golf, right? And you got to network. And I don't like networking. And I know we talked about before the podcast about being here, interruptions and stuff. Can you hear Matthew in the background? My 18-month-old.
Is that what that is? I thought it was a chainsaw.
It does sound like a chainsaw at times. So for the listeners, I have an 18-month-old baby boy, Matthew, and he is getting more and more vocal at lunchtime. And so just noticed he's up having lunch, and it does at times sound like a chainsaw. So I apologize for that in the background. So anyways, the point of the story about networking was someone said to me, it's like, just go and meet one person that you would want to have a conversation with in the future. If you go to a networking event and just meet one real person that you actually connect with, that's all you need to do. And I'm like, wow, okay, well, it changed everything for me. When I go to an event, I just want to meet one person. Now, what happens is I meet a lot more than that.
Exactly.
But I don't want to meet a bunch of people. I want to meet people that I like, that maybe I would interact with, maybe I would refer to other people, maybe that would end up working with me, perhaps. And for me, it changed it for my life. Now, I'm not a person that works the room. I don't do that. That's not my style. And I don't think that would be the style of most of the people that we work with that are bookkeepers. But for those that are, it's great. They do a great job of it. But think in terms of just that one connection for me really made a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a story I share in my book that talks about an early experience with networking that my husband really helped me with, because at the time he was a nonprofit public relations director, and he's also an introvert. And we had to go to this networking event that was after hours, and it was kind of late, and I didn't know anybody in the room. And I was like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go in, and I don't know anybody. And he said, look, if you come in now, you know me. And the next time we come to this, you're going to know 2 or 3 more people. And then the next time you're going to know maybe 4 or 5 more. And then before you know it, you're going to know half the room. But in order to do that, you have to start, and you have to just show up, and you have to trust that over time, you will start to know more and more people and get comfortable with it. Because that's one of the biggest fears. And even extroverts will say this. I don't enjoy going into a room where I don't know anybody. And the point is, the only way you're going to get to know anybody is to keep showing up. And keep showing up in places where you feel like you just said, you want to meet with people that you're going to enjoy talking with. And so if you start showing up places where you continually walk out without having a satisfying conversation, then maybe those aren't the places to be showing up, because that's probably not your tribe. Pay attention to that and keep showing up those places where you do consistently say, yeah, I met a couple nice people there. That was pretty cool. And keep going there.
I like that. I think that's really valuable advice. And it speaks to focus, right? Is find a place where there are people that you think will be people you want to spend time with, and just consistently do that. I know Business Networking International, or BNIs, are very popular. And I have my story about any kind of networking group is go and find people that are great people that are ambitious and want to do things in their life and be successful at business. If you spend time with them, I mean, life's going to go in a different direction. It's going to be successful direction to go in. However, they're not all built like that. So find the right group. And what I think you're saying is go find a place where meeting and getting to know those people will be valuable. And then eventually it'll be very comfortable. It'll be your territory, your environment, which I think is fantastic. And it's a lot of investment of time. And so that's the risk, is if you spend time where you don't want to be, I mean, you're wasting your time and you're not going to see a return.
Absolutely. And for introverts, I always think of it, you're wasting your energy. It takes a lot of energy to get out there and do that. And often they'll say, like, the hardest thing is just getting out the door. It's hard to get out the door if you're not looking forward to at least the prospect of having that interesting conversation.
Fantastic. And it's a great thought on the energy. Quite frankly, that's where the highest cost, I guess would be on their energy, because it's not natural for them to be there, and it's going to be an energy drainer.
Right.
This is great. Well, this has been a great conversation. Let's talk a little bit about your recommendations or things that they can do, whether it's going to your site or maybe some ideas or actions that they can take to sort of further this conversation around leveraging their strengths, as a person might have some introverted, be slightly introverted people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't suggest, checking out my site and my podcast, because I have talked with a number of other folks who are really good at sharing some insights about selling and marketing and networking. And so checking out my podcast, and the website is theintrovertentrepreneur.com. I'd want to recommend, 2 other books though, and folks to follow, and that's Dan Pink. One of his more recent books is called To Sell is Human. And in there, he actually dedicates a little bit of space to talking about the introvert-extrovert dynamic when it comes to sales. And one quick takeaway I'll leave your listeners with around that is that what they found was when they tracked successful salespeople, it wasn't the ones who could talk the best, it was the ones who could listen the best, who had the most success. And listening is often what I call an introvert superpower. We tend to be really good listeners. We like to listen more than we like to talk. And if you can really listen to your prospects, to your clients, to the people that you're networking with, you're going to make more meaningful connections. And it kind of takes the burden. I think part of the reason we love it is because it takes the burden off of us to come up with something to say on the spot. We can kind of ask a few questions and then listen. And people like to be seen and heard. It's a real fundamental human need. So Dan Pink's book, To Sell is Human, shares a little bit of data and research about that, as well as lots of other great advice and information for the salesperson. That and he's coming, I think, because he includes that, you can trust that he's coming from that more kind of balanced sensibility. He's not going to say, you've got to get out there and shout from the rooftops. It's going to be a slightly more nuanced perspective. And then another colleague that I like to refer people to is Nancy Ankowitz, who wrote a book called Self-Promotion for Introverts. And the name says it all. It's acknowledging that self-promotion is sometimes something that we feel a little challenged with. We're not always keen on tooting our own horn. And her book offers a lot of anecdotes and advice on how to do that self-promotion without feeling gross. So those are a couple of books I would recommend in addition to my own, where I spend a lot of time. My networking chapter is the longest one because it's the area that seems to have the most angst as well as the most potential for the introvert entrepreneur to really thrive.
This is great. Well, those are some real valuable resources to go and pick up. And I think one thing I will say is your podcast, the Introvert Entrepreneur podcast, I've had a look, and on your website, you've been named 100 podcasts that will make you smarter, better, and wiser by Inc.com, top 25 business podcasts for entrepreneurs on entrepreneur.com, Inspiring Women's Voices and What's Hot business category, iTunes, March 2015. So this is a podcast that I think our community of successful bookkeepers definitely needs to have on their listening track. So do that. And then as well, you can go to Beth's website, the introvertentrepreneur.com. We'll have all of those on our site, thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com, of course. And that one about Dan Pink, I want to say, it's interesting. I didn't mention it in the beginning, but one of the comment that I made about people thinking that they need to be these gregarious people, that was from Dan Pink. I met Dan at a conference and was interviewing him, and he said exactly that, is that people think that salespeople are these big gorillas and patting people on the back and playing golf and smoking cigars. And actually, they're not the best salespeople. When he's looked at all these salespeople all over the world, they're, as you say, the people who actually ask questions and listen. And they're very quiet people. If you look at the top performing salespeople in an organization, isn't that interesting? So I'm glad you brought up Dan, and totally forgot that was my reference, where that reference was coming. And if I can dig it up, I will put that for the listeners. I will put that at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com in the resources section. If I can find that interview with him, I will post that as well, because I think it would be very valuable. And thank you, Beth, for bringing that out of my brain.
Yeah.
This has been great, Beth. I just really love speaking with someone who's put their whole life around an area of thought leadership like this. It is just refreshing to be listening to some of your thoughts and your advice for our community. And on behalf of all the listeners, I know that you do these things, and as podcasters and all the work that you do and content that you do it for virtually nothing for the most part in terms of the work that you need to put into it. So on behalf of all of us, thank you. We really do appreciate your time and being able to share some of your knowledge with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you, Michael. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you.
Yes, until next time. Thanks, everybody. That's another episode. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about our guest today, you can find everything in the show notes at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Please subscribe on iTunes and leave us a review. We'd really love to hear what you think. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear that as well. Take care.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.